Hello and welcome back to Open Source Workplace. I'm very happy to bring back Cristina Herrera back for another chat. Cristina, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing really well. We're doing really well. We've had, I think this is our third episode we've done now, so it's becoming quite a popular video for you and
Yeah,
for me.
I'm very happy to hear that. I mean, I think my priority is knowledge sharing. It'll help all of us become better and really elevate the industry. So I'm glad to share.
No, well done you, and thank you for doing so. And how's this last week been for you?
It's been pretty well. I was a little sick earlier in the week, but I've totally passed that. I'm great now. I had a really great weekend. Spent some time in the park, which was
Nice.
lovely. How
Good,
about
good,
yours?
good. Mine was great, thank you. I really appreciate you asking. So obviously we're probably in week 7, week 8, depending on where you are in around the world of
Mm.
lockdown. And as we look back, or you look at where you are today, is there anything specifically you would wish you knew back then before we went into lockdown?
Personally, I wish I knew how many subscriptions and memberships I had before lockdown. I found out that I had a subscription to an ice cream company, and I can't use the money that's sitting in that account because they're closed.
Oh my
um,
goodness.
so that's my personal
Uh,
one.
yeah.
Professionally, I wish I knew how much you could accomplish with low tech. Going out on my own, I found that, I don't have all the programs that I used to have being employed. I don't have access to, the professional headsets and, Adobe Illustrator and InDesign and all of that. But without having to go in and purchase all that new technology and programs and, systems, I can still accomplish what I need to accomplish to a high standard. And there is a way to make this and make it very successful with low tech.
Totally agree with you. That was one of my big surprises when I started and launched Open Source Workplace was actually how many free tools there are out there, how many low cost tools, low cost options. And sometimes I think whenever you have to hustle a bit more, you actually do that little bit more work to find those free solutions.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So as I said, this is our third week, and sort of to date, we've touched on change management, workplace strategy. What are those differences? We talked a little bit data last week, but the one thing you always went back to was corporate strategy, right? Corporate strategy is the foundation to anything we want to do. One on workplace strategy and change management being the mechanism to make that happen and execute on that. So how do you go about actually getting to understanding a corporate strategy?
So corporate strategy is very complex, and hopefully, when you're establishing your business from scratch, you've already articulated, what your business plan is, what your differentiator is, your resources, and how they're working towards your overall plan. But if you find yourself in a situation where you're thinking, I haven't looked at, or I haven't reviewed, or I don't actually know what my corporate strategy is, the best thing to do would be to sit down with leaders in the organization and department heads and actually do a corporate strategy assessment review. So that would be discussing, what direction the organization needs to move into, what that looks like from an overall operational standpoint. So there are 3 kind of key organization-wide strategies that you could use. And I'm looking down at my notes to make sure I get them right. So the first strategy would be scale. So are you going to take a scale strategy and view of your business where you're offering the lowest price, but maybe you don't have a really great selection of products or services, or maybe you don't have the best quality, but that low price is really what's going to get your foot in the door. The next would be speed. So how quick you are to market and how high that quality is, paired with that speed. That is a strategy that organizations use as well. It is the highest quality for how quick we're going to market. And then the scope. So when you think of scope, you think of this niche for your services. Have you found that niche, that group of people or organizations that are going to require your services? And this strategy is definitely relationship driven. But once you try and evaluate where your business is going, you need to really think about, especially in this unprecedented time with COVID, what is a priority right now? Is it getting out to market with new services? Is it focusing on our niche? Because that niche absolutely needs us and there's a problem to be solved. And then how we're going to market those strategies. So I'm saying a lot all at once, and I'm sorry. But it is definitely very complex. To take a step back, you have to think of your corporate strategy like a system, like cogs in a system, right? So they're all working in sync and each of them are contributing to each other. If you have decided to go and make a business decision that doesn't really align with all of the other systems, it could be sitting outside of the system on its own. That might be okay for now if you're testing something new out, but ultimately it's not going to be aligned to the overall strategy. You might end up finding that you're not getting the resources in the budget that you need, and that ultimately it's not going to really succeed.
I love how you took the basics of workplace or how to get to corporate strategy and bring it into today's world, because everything is ever changing, and those tools to understand what they need to be going forward is very important. But whenever you're a consultant and you go into a business, is there specific questions or tactics that you like to deploy or you've seen being used that are successful, even if it's just one or two, that actually allows you to quickly understand what a corporate strategy is?
Yeah, I use a lot of questioning techniques and coaching techniques. It's very tough because, to be honest, many people don't fully understand what the corporate strategy is and the direction that they're moving in. So when you ask these questions, it can be really difficult for people. They feel like they've been pushed back against the wall, into a corner. But questioning is definitely the most important, and active listening. So understanding whether they are looking for the best talent, or understanding whether they're looking to engage or work with a particular segment of the market is going to be really important in establishing kind of that foundation. Those questions are easier for people to answer, because then you can start the broader conversation of, well, how does everything fit into each other? How did your decision on XYZ impact, every other decision that you've made? What was your strategic trade-off? What did you let go because it was no longer serving you? So those are the types of questions you need to ask, but I always recommend starting where people feel most comfortable so that they can open up. One of the strategies that I use in change management, which is an organizational development strategy, was developed by a guy called Reed Deschler. And he thinks of an organization as a Rubik's Cube. And each Rubik's Cube has a different assignment. It could be culture and values, leadership, metrics, structure. And to put it very simply, you can't change one side of the Rubik's Cube without inadvertently messing up the other sides. You just can't do it.
Yeah.
So, his methodology and his view of an organization is everything needs to be aligned to that corporate strategy, and everything needs to be able to say, yes, if I decide to take this decision, I can make it measurable and it's going to impact my corporate strategy in this particular way.
No, that's great. A great analogy and a great visual to understand the sort of the connections between many of those things. And one thing you mentioned was culture. So obviously today, culture's changed dynamically, across every organization. So how should organizations be thinking about culture? How should workplace leaders and professionals be thinking about culture and how that has changed and evolved over the last couple of months?
Culture is a really interesting one because often we find that the culture of the organization isn't exactly aligning with the culture of the people coming through the door. Some people do hire for a culture fit, and that works sometimes, but other times you can get groupthink, right? Where you're not getting enough variability because they don't fully understand how to understand or measure that culture. So for me, culture really comes down to values. So understanding what the organization values. If they value a great employee experience, not just leaving it there as an identified value, but actually understanding what does that look like from a leadership standpoint, from a people manager standpoint, from an employee standpoint, even from the standpoint of someone working in the mailroom or a sub-consultant or a contractor. The value that you actually set for your organization is going to set the tone for the culture, but it has to be something that can be demonstrated, at least initially.
So that's, I mean, it's easier to demonstrate it initially when you're coming from the top down, right? But that sort of the question of culture, the way we do things around here, that's the culture that really has been disrupted right now. And I have to imagine the struggle for new starters who are being onboarded, the culture that they're trying to feel that just isn't there. And I feel for those people. I'm not sure
Mm.
if you've given that aspect any thought about how it impact culture.
Yeah, I really think that it's just people having different values or a value
Mm.
system from the organization they're working from. And I do think we're going to see a very significant shift coming. Just recently on LinkedIn, I was chatting with someone around how do we empower employees not to set, non-negotiables around this is what I need in my workplace, but how do you do it in a very diplomatic way to say, this is how I do my best work. I am successful when I can work in a culture that is um, uh, supportive of knowledge sharing, that is not a micromanaging situation with my manager, um, that fosters collaboration, that encourages me to make mistakes. That is the type of thing that I'm hoping I can start to work with some people and try and develop a bit of a toolkit so employees can self-identify what makes them the most successful.
I love it, and I love where we finished that off. That's so good, and yeah, so many thoughts, Christina, you've given us today. And again, I thank you for being so sharing and sharing your
Mm.
knowledge. It means a lot. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's great to be here.